How many times longer is the longer line than the shorter line? Make your own estimate. Think about it. And now, let's see. Well, if I divide the longer line into half, I'm about here. If I divide that in half, I get a quarter, and that's going to be about here. And if I divide that in half, I get an eighth, which is going to be around here. So 1/8 isn't a bad, or 8 isn't a bad estimate. Okay. Now I want you to pause and make estimates for this pair, this pair, this pair, this pair, this pair, this pair, and this pair. Hopefully you made your estimates. Now if I use the method that I was using, if I divide this in half, I get this. Divide that in half, I get this. Divide that in half, I get this. And divide that in half, I get this. And it looks like that's a little longer than this interval. This would be 1/16, because here's half of this line. Here's half of that, which would be a quarter of this line. It would take 4 of these to make the line. This would be half of that, which is an eighth. This would be a 16th. So I would say that it would take about 14 of these. Okay, similarly, I can divide this one up. There's a half, there's a quarter, there's an eighth. It's a little less than eighth. I'll say maybe 10. Okay. Now I'm going to make the rest of my estimates, see if you want to refine any of yours. I've gone ahead and written down my estimates for these other lines. Mine aren't necessarily any more accurate than yours, but if I estimate 40 and you estimate 500, one of us is wrong. So you can check out and see who you think that might be. Now let's ask the question, what fraction of the length of the longer is the length of the shorter? So what fraction of this is this? What fraction of this is this? You should pause, write down your answer for yourself, commit yourself. In any case, okay. Now hopefully you've done that, but okay, maybe 8. So that means maybe this is 8 times as long as this, which means the shorter is 1/8 of this. Here the shorter is 1/14. Here the shorter would be 1/10. Down here it might be 1/10 over here, 1/20th, 1/3, 1/40th, 1/20th. So the fractions that we've written here are represented by short segment as a fraction of the long segment. Now, this is 1 unit, this is 1 unit. We want to divide, we want to see how many of these various numbers would go into this one. Okay, so how many of this would you need to make up this? How many of this would you need to make up this? How many of this and of this would you need to make up this? You should write down your estimates. Now there's no guarantee that I subdivided each of these increments in half, but that's what I intended to do. If we assume I was successful in doing that, more or less, then this would be half of 1, and it would take 2 of those to make up 1. So our answers would be to take 2 of these, it would take 4 of these, it would take 8 of these, it would take 16 of these. So I could write those numbers, 2, 4, 8, well that's the wrong way to write them, 16, 8, 4, 2. It would take 2 of this interval. It would take 4 of this distance. It would take 8 of these, it would take 16 of these. Now if we keep, and I can't do it on the board because the chalk line is going to get as thick as the interval, but if I continue subdividing this, let's say 6 more times, how many of the resulting intervals will it take to make up this interval of 1? Well, if I subdivide this again, it's going to take 32 intervals. Every time it's going to take twice as many as before, because every time I'm cutting the interval in half. So we're going to get 32, then 64, then 128, then 256, then 512, then 1,024. Next question, how many times longer is this 1 up here than each of these successive segments? You should think about that, see if you agree with what I'm about to say. Okay, twice as long, then 4 times as long, then the second, twice as long as this one because it takes 2 of these to make this, 4 times as long as this one because it takes 4 of these to make this, and then it's going to be 8, 16, 32, etc., down to 1,024, and I have no idea why I wrote that 5. We keep going in the same pattern, continuing to subdivide this. What's the limit? What's the limit to how many times this segment, how many of these segments would it take to make up this segment? And the limit is what? What do you think? Think, then watch. Okay? There's no limit. The result approaches infinity. Result approaches infinity. Now we see that the length of this is half the length of this, so this represents a half, and when we say that 2 of these are required to make up 1, what we're saying is that 1 divided by 1/2 is 2. When you have a number divided by another, the answer is how many times the divisor will go into the dividend. Okay, how many times this number will go into this number. When we use this segment, it takes 4 of these, so we say that 1 divided by 1/4 is 4. Or then 1 divided by 1/8 takes 8 of those, that's going to be 8. It's not just numbers to remember and memorize, it has a meaning. It's the meaning of division.